got a bunch of people here, so
I'll get him to throw him his way.
we good over there?
Yeah.
Okay. Jim, we're ready to go live. Okay. All right. So we are live on HCAM. So we will go ahead and get started as it is 6:30. Welcome and thank you. What's that? Can't hear you. Can't hear me? Can we, okay, I'll talk a little louder and hopefully the microphone will. That's better? Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is John Graziano. I'm the chair of the Elementary School Building Committee and just wanted to open the meeting, welcome everyone to the forum and quickly go over the agenda. As with our past forums, we have 90 minutes tonight, so our goal is going to be to really split the time, 45 minutes or so for content, but what we really want to do is hear questions from community members. So we're going to try to allow as much time as possible to answer any questions that you have, which includes the people here in the audience as well as the people watching on HCAM. So our agenda, this is the welcome portion of our agenda. So then we'll talk about the overall process and approvals, where we are on the status of the project right now. We will talk about the system-wide study that was run for all buildings across the school district and how it relates back to this project. We'll then also talk about the study that we've done on potential sites for a replacement for the Elmwood School. Traffic highlights, the evaluation criteria that we're using to evaluate sites, what some of our plan options are. We'll then talk about sustainability and how it relates to this project and what some of our objectives are, what the schedule ahead and key dates, and then questions and comments at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to our project manager from Vertex, Jeff D'Amico.
Thank you. Jeff D'Amico, Owner's Project Manager from Vertex Companies. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about the MSBA process. The Mass School Building Authority is your partner in the process. They have a prescribed program where there's 3 major submissions in order to get to the point of which the town would vote for the project to move forward. They're behind me on the screen here. The first submission is known as the Preliminary Design Program. That's the one we completed this past December. Really, where we look at the existing conditions of the Elmwood School as well as the sites available in town. We do a test fit, which is we look at the size of the building and how it might fit on those parcels to allow the building committee to narrow down to the sites that are viable to hold the new Elmwood School. In parallel to that, the school department works with the educational program, which is they develop the vision in narrative form of what the school wants to be, and that becomes a roadmap for the architects to take and implement into their overall design. The last bullet there is the space summary template. The MSBA has a program that, based on the number of students you have in the building, it spits out the size of the building that you're supposed to build. So that it goes down to the granular detail of number of classrooms, how large the gym and cafeteria spaces are. So it's a prescribed process. There's little bits of ways to influence that in terms of special education and other unique programs, but the general education areas are part of that overall program summary from the MSBA. Where we are currently is in the middle of the slide here, which is the preferred schematic report. The building committee is narrowing in the options. They've looked at many test fits. They've looked at more refined plans. You'll see floor plans tonight for all the options that are still in play. In parallel, the school committee is also looking at the grade configuration. As most of you know, there's 2 grade configuration options on the table with the Mass School Building Authority. One is replacement of the 2-3 configuration, and the second is to bring the 4th grade in for a 3-grade configuration. At the end of this stage, we're looking to have the school committee recommend which grade configuration to move forward with, and then the building committee will select the preferred site and the location on that site. That'll all happen by the middle of February, wrapping up in a submission at the beginning of March into the state. From there, we would enter into the schematic design, which is roughly 30% of the overall design. It really gets into the nitty-gritty. You've selected your site, you know how big it is, and now you look at the actual impacts. What do the design look like? What's the traffic impacts, geotechnical, sustainability? Really gets down to the granular details that we then summarize up into a final cost that'll then go back in front of the state for approval and back in front of the town for a funding vote targeted for this fall. And so what that looks like on a timeline standpoint, these green stars, blobs, are the community forums that we've had to date. There have been 4 that have happened to date. This is our 5th forum. We're presenting the data for the project, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But this is that overall timeline where we're looking to submit to the state in March. We would complete the schematic design by the end of the summer, and we would submit the final price at that point, the final program, and the final details of the project to both the town and the state for their funding votes. Right now, the state vote would be tied to the end of October, and the town vote would likely be a special town meeting in the November timeframe, but that's still to be confirmed with the town. From there, we would then go through with a full funding of the design phase, and that would carry us through all of 2024, looking to break ground and construction at the start of 2025. Roughly a 2-year build, and then have the building online for at least the mid-year span of the 2026 to 2027 timeframe. And we could take more questions on schedule later. So where we've been to date, there have been 4 community forums, and these are the topics in big picture that we've covered as a group. The first forum, which we had back in September, we talked about the overall process, which I've just restated. We focused on the why Elmwood and why now, talking about the lack of condition of that existing building and the real need for not only the overcrowding, but the facility itself is past its useful life and in need of replacement. At the second forum, we talked about existing conditions of the sites themselves. We covered the site search in town, which you'll hear a little bit about later. The second forum after that, we covered preliminary program and studies and grade configuration. We've covered visioning, the traffic-wide studies and the system-wide studies, and other educational considerations. We recapped that in an earlier forum in January, and we're here in front of you tonight to take further. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob to talk about his slides.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Bell. I'm a principal and an educational planner and programmer from Perkins Eastman, your architect. I'm joined with Dan Colley, who's the project manager, and we have some of our sustainability team here in the audience. The system-wide study has been presented. I'm going to go through at a very high level, and I'm sure there may be questions that we can circle back and answer at the end of the session. But this study has been done in parallel with the Elmwood School project. The Elmwood project is part of an MSBA process with the 2 different grade configurations, and it's planned to receive reimbursement from the state. One of this parallel study was looking at the entire district, all the schools outside of the Elmwood School, but taking into account those grade configurations and the projected enrollments. So the slide that you're seeing here shows at the top the current enrollments for each grade level, and those are gathered to show or illustrate what the current enrollment is in each school. Then the bottom 2 bars show the projected enrollment, and you can see the increases. It's about 22.2% overall. That's based on a 10-year average, a 10-year projection, the average of those 10 years for each grade level. And that's about what enrollment projections are good. They usually go out about 10 years. After that, they become less and less reliable, so it's pretty much a standard to go out the 10 years. So this is to 2032. Within the projected enrollments to 2032, we're seeing the current configuration, so that's the grade structure that you have now, and you can see the individual school sizes and the percent increases for each one of those schools. We also show if Elmwood School, if the project were a grade 2, 3, 4, adding the additional grade, and then you can see the impact of where the Elmwood School gets larger with the increased grade, and then there's a shift in grades for Hopkins and then the middle school. One of the things we looked at in the system-wide study are the existing schools and tried to determine capacity of those schools. Capacity is maybe not as simple or straightforward as you might think, because it's really about tolerance for class sizes and, excuse me, lost. I'll try not to move.
Don't touch that.
So we took a look at each one of the schools. We looked at how the schools were planned or built. So that's to say the number of classrooms and what is the standard classroom size for each grade level. That determines what we would say is the planned capacity. You can see here across the schools we have the planned or as-built enrollment, and then just below that what your current enrollment is. And you can see that You're very close in the elementary schools, and as you go up through the grades, there's a little bit more wiggle room. But if we go to the bottom row and you see the 10-year projections, really we see a wave of enrollment increases coming. What this study shows us is that all of the small modular classrooms or the additions that have been happening at each one of the schools is keeping pace with your enrollment increases, but as we look further out at these 10-year projections in the increase, we know that there's more work to come. Another way to look at the enrollment increases is to, again, look at each grade level, to chart each one of the individual schools, so the Marathon, the Elmwood, Hopkins, the middle school, and the high school. And here what we've done is taken those projected enrollments and coded them so that green represents meeting the planned capacity or maybe 1 or 2 students more per classroom. Not a significant departure, but a little bit more than you would prefer. When we get into the yellow, which you can see just for some of the schools just a couple of years out or a year out, we can see that now you'll need to add 1 or 2 students per room. You may need to repurpose some of the spaces, so maybe health or art end up on a cart, rooms get reused, or there are more than 1 or 2 students added per classroom. Still within the range of what you can do. In fact, these are some of the measures that have been in place in some of the schools over the past few years that you're coming out of with some of the work that's being done. When we get to the red, what we're saying there is that you've added 1 or 2 students per room, you've repurposed some spaces, and you still don't have enough. The capacity is too great. So you're either increasing your class sizes more significantly beyond what would be the target, as well as repurposing. This is the point at which we would say you really need to be adding space to the schools. What that space looks like as we take the number of classrooms and other spaces and project them onto each one of the buildings, you can see the red or the orange color here shows the approximate size of the additions for each school. So at Marathon, we could see another 23,000 square feet. Again, this is for the projections further out. Elmwood would be a renovation that would require about 42,000 square feet, and so on. That top row that you're looking at there shows each one of your schools with the current configuration. The bottom row shows if we were to go to a grade 2, 3, 4. And some of the things that are different here are you can see the Elmwood School is no longer potentially an addition. What we found is that the number of classrooms by adding a grade is too great to just be done in an addition to that school. The site is too constrained. It would result in a school that's 4 or 5 stories tall, which really isn't viable for an elementary school of those grades. We also, in the circle here, we showed an alternative if the Marathon School were just K to 1, meaning that the pre-K might move out, possibly into the current Elmwood School, if Elmwood were built new, possibly be a standalone facility. It was just a little bit of a kind of an adjunct study. It requires more work to determine, but that was something that we also looked at here. If we were to aggregate the square footages, what we can see is after the current Elmwood School project, there's about 108,000 square feet, which still required at the remaining school facilities. That's if it's a grade 2, 3 current configuration. If your current project, which is receiving MSBA reimbursement, is a grade 2 to 4, it's about 2/3 of that, so 68,000 square feet is still required. It's still a lot to do, but we can see the impact here of the grade 2, 3 versus 2, 3, 4. We also put a probable schedule and cost to the scenarios here. This is really just creating a pathway, so there are assumptions built in. I'll let Jeff go over the schedule.
Thanks, Bob. So a lot to read here in the font you don't have to focus in on. So what this is we looked at where the need was. And so the red wave here aligns with Bob's prior slides, where he talks about as the enrollment grows and that hits each individual grade, here's when it would hit the respective schools that are in front of you. So the color codes that's on the scale there is green is the Elmwood School, orange is the Hopkins School, the middle school is in purple, and light pink, or sorry, the high school is in purple, and the middle school is in light pink, and then the Marathon School is in peach. And so just to orientate you to that. So we're working as part of the Elmwood project. As I alluded earlier, the timeline for that is to start construction in January 2025 and wrap that up by the end of 2026. Depending on the size of the school, it could be earlier or later, depending on whether you decide to hire a construction manager versus a general contractor. There are nuances, but for the purpose of this exercise, we kept that consistent with a general contractor delivery method, which means it's a linear process versus a construction manager where you can do earlier packages, and I can take questions on that later as well. Under this scenario, you see the greatest need has to do with the Hopkins School next, besides Elmwood, and so the focus there is that would be the first project that would need to move forward in parallel with the Elmwood School project. We worked with the school department to think about the overall capacity and borrowing needs of the town in terms of how we would layer these projects out. So under this scenario, it assumes that there are 2 schools under construction at a given time. In this case, the first would be Elmwood and Hopkins, and when those projects are complete, the additions could move on to the high school, middle school, and/or Marathon if necessary as we go through those other future studies. The phase for Hopkins would be to start in summer of 2024 and wrap up by summer of 2026, so also a 2-year duration for that addition renovation, and actually come online before the completion of the Elmwood School, helping deal with the overcrowding that already exists in that school today. The main difference between these 2 slides are the high school addition and middle school renovation versus the 2-4 to 2-3 solution at Elmwood. One of the key decisions here is that by choosing to have 3 grades brought into the Elmwood School project, it decompresses the stress at the middle school and other grades throughout the school district. And so by having a 3-grade configuration here, it actually frees up space not only for the decompression of the middle school to deal with their current enrollment issue, but also frees up swing space so that renovations to the high school and middle school can be done more streamlined. So it would make an overall shorter duration to any additions or renovations to the middle school should the town choose to move forward with a 2-4 solution. The Hopkins in all solutions is about even, whether it's a 5-6 or a 4-5, it's about the same level of space needs at that school. And then the Marathon is also an independent variable. So the decision to go 2-4 has the most effect on the middle school and high school in terms of the relief pressure and the expedition at which the addition renovations can occur at those buildings. So what does that mean to cost overall? And I wanted to present the schedule first because that is relative to the overall cost. And so, again, you can't really read this font either because it is small. But the bottom lines are large focus here. And so that means that if the town chose to go with the 2-3 configuration at Elmwood, the overall ask based on this scenario for the district-wide study could be a potential of $327 million worth of additions at all the buildings in town, plus including the replacement of Elmwood. If the 2-4 scenario happened, instead of 327, it'd actually be 321 million. So a savings of $6 million overall, but you've also leveraged the benefit of the MSBA taking on one of the replacement grades, which would result in a $9 million of additional reimbursement that would come back to the town. So essentially, it would be a $15 million savings to go with the 2-4 solution, because it not only gets you more project reimbursed from the state, it also delivers some of the subsequent renovations in shorter time and duration at the middle school and high school. So it has a ripple effect on some of the value and benefits there. I'll focus for a minute on the Elmwood, because that's the project that we're here to talk most about tonight. The Elmwood project, if it's a 2-3 solution, could be 124 to 127 million total project cost. And if it's a 2-4, it could be around 160 to 164 million. The building committee will make a decision next month on the relative cost of the options, but it's not the final number that will come back to the town. That will occur in August when they've really drilled down on all the specifics of the site. They've fine-tuned the program. They've made decisions about sustainability, about contingencies, about how to make sure that they can deliver the overall project for the number. Those of you that have paid at the pump over the last couple of years know how high inflation has been, and that's reflected in these costs. And I want to take a pause to talk about that for a second, because those of you that are reflecting back on the last large project you had in town, which is the Marathon School, that was substantially less than the project we're talking about here. And so that project, which was completed 7 years ago, was under very different economic conditions than where we are today. Pre-COVID, we averaged 3 to 4% annually in terms of escalation. The first year of COVID, that throttled back to 1%. In the past 2 years, it's been 12% consecutive years. So it's very different than what we were back, when the Marathon School was designed and built. And so these dollars here, for all the numbers that are on their side, are reflective of today's current conditions. Should we return to normal, we are seeing some softening in the last 60 days with the bid results at the end of December and into January, which is a great metric and a great milestone. So by the time we get to the August submission, we'll have much more certainty on how much the economy has recovered and what's the right number that you want to bring back to the town. And obviously, once the economy does recover and does kind of normalize, some of these other numbers related to the other future additions at the other schools will also be right-sized for current market conditions. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan to
Jeff,
talk about.
sorry, before we turn it over to Dan, that section was a lot of information and probably a lot of new information for the audience. So this is probably outside my role as ESBC chair, but with respect to my school committee colleagues, I just want to contextualize it a little bit. Perkins Eastman, with the help of Vertex, was asked to create this study, which is designed to do an assessment of the current space and future needs. So what you saw there were largely data inputs. So I don't want people in the audience to think that there is a proposal there, that there is something that's going, that's going to the voters. That is information about the current space, the potential deficits of the space, what solutions could visually look like, what timelines could look like if you were trying to rationalize all of these projects. That's all that's happened to this point. The school committee and the school district will be taking a look at all of this in sort of a broader context and figuring out what makes sense for the town. So I can understand the first time I saw that report, you get a little bit of whiplash because it looks like, oh my gosh, there's all these new building projects we're doing in the next 5 years. This is data. That's all it is. And a lot more discussion, deliberation, and planning is going to come before any of that gets to reality. And I'm getting some nods from the school committee members over here, so I think I got that right. Thank you. I just wanted to make
That's a
sure.
great introduction, John. And yeah, our focus tonight is mainly on the Elmwood project, but we wanted to provide the context because that is a question that's come up at the past forums and throughout the town as well, of how does this fit in the overall needs of the school projects that are beyond this project.
So one of the first tasks that we undertook when we started the project was to identify potential sites within the community that might be able to host a school of this size. We knew from our experience how big of a site we needed, and we were able to, through GIS and other means, locate about 44 different sites across the community that could potentially host a school of this size with this program. The first piece after that was to look at the basics of each one of the sites, the topographical, the environmental, the adjacencies of the sites, access to the site, both from local area and from the whole town-wide perspective, right-of-ways and other constraints that might exist on each one of the sites. And through that process, we narrowed it down to 5, which are shown here. Those 5 were the ones that we selected to put the test fits on. The test fit is basically a block of a building, which is an envelope the size of the prospective program that we're looking at with the site program to see how that fits and interacts with each one of these sites. That kind of teases out more issues that might exist on each one of the sites and was able to, at the end of that, we ended up back at the Hayden Row site and the Elm Street site as the 2 preferred sites after looking at the test fits and the other data that was collected during the site selection process. The traffic, let's talk a little bit about that. And we have an excellent traffic engineer who is unfortunately in Florida. Unfortunately for me, fortunate for him. He has been here twice, and there is a excellent video, November 8th presentation that he did for the ESBC that that would be a high level of what he's done so far. I'm going to be an even higher level. The traffic engineering team did go to both of the sites. They have done physical counts at both sites, and they have watched at each site been out twice to watch the drop-offs, pickups, and all traffic operations at both the Elmwood site and the Marathon site. At the Elmwood site, the key takeaways was about 1,300 or so trips per day, 665 in the morning and 665 in the afternoon. The AM queues are contained on the site, but the PM queues extend into Elm Street, which causes a traffic backup, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. At the marathon, there's roughly 1,300 drop-offs, which is about the same, a little over 600 for the entries and 600 for exit. Interestingly, though, the PM queues are contained on the site, but the AM queues were the ones that they saw extending off onto Hayden Row Street for a short period of time, creating additional traffic on Hayden Row. This graphic that they created shows the vertical lines, dashed vertical lines are the arrival and dismissal times for all the schools on Hayden Row. So the red line, I believe, is the high school and the middle school, or is that the, nope, sorry, the pink line. And the red line is the marathon and the Hopkins. So what this is showing, the tallest of the lines here is the traffic, the most traffic. So going on the vertical axis, that is the peak traffic time. So you can see that in the morning, the peak traffic time is about 7 a.m. And then the schools are a little bit after that. So your peak traffic comes up, and then the schools actually are coming in after that peak time. So the schools are not increasing that peak. They're a little bit below that peak. In the afternoons, same thing. The peak time is roughly around 5:30, 6 o'clock. That's the most traffic. That's the peak time. The schools are letting out earlier than that. And there's one little data point here where you can see there's a little jump there where it looks like there's a peak happening between the drop-off of the high school, middle school, and the marathon. The reason for that is that there's residual traffic coming out of the high school that's still on that's coming into the traffic on Hayden Row, which is what's pushing that little peak, that bar up a little bit. But the point of this slide is that the peak times for Hayden Row in the mornings and in the afternoons do not overlap with the entrance and exit times for the schools on Hayden Row. So his key initial findings for the Elm Street site, although it's a constrained site, it does have access to Wood Street, and they are strongly recommending that we create a second access point onto Wood Street. For the Hayden Row site, the potential is really about improving on-site circulation and having potentially a new building and the marathon sharing one campus where all the combine the entry and where all the traffic for both buildings could be on-site and be contained within the site. There's also potential for consolidating busing, which we may eliminate busing crossing, which will eliminate buses crossing to the campuses, but may reduce the amounts of busing in town. A delayed start and dismissal is something that has as key, that's a potential that we might look at to try to alleviate those bumps that you saw on the slide before. Exploration of signal control and consider more calming measures. Those are things that we'll look at when we get into a much more in-depth traffic study in the next phase. So we'll be doing a much deeper dive on this when we get into schematic design.
So the evaluation criteria is the next topic. So at the past community forums and at the start of the project, the ESBC developed some project-specific criteria that they would use as a guide as they start to evaluate the options. And so that the bulleted list is behind you. There's about 17 items that were brought forward by the building committee, school committee, and the public forums that we heard to develop the list that's behind me on the screen. And so that criteria is what they'll use as a guide as they evaluate the relative comparison of the options that are in front of us, and which you'll see momentarily. And so I just wanted to plant this in front of you now so you see the same criteria that the building committee is going to be evaluating. We're working with the building committee to go through this criteria over a few meetings. So over their next 3 meetings, we're going to divide this up to help them work through the data as they get to narrowing of their recommended solution in February. So our recommendation is that we focus on the right side of the screen of items 9 through 17, which really focus more on site, about traffic, on-site and off-site, permitting complexities, whether there's wetlands or ledge, district operations with traffic and busing, what the public safety has to say, as we have a meeting scheduled with them to collect their feedback as well. And we'd bring that to the next building committee meeting on January 31st and kind of digest all that. And then the following meeting on February 7th, we would then focus on the right side with items 1 through 8. Really, you focus more on the program. What does the building look like? Cost, schedule, disruptions to the education. Sustainability and net zero, we talked about at our last building committee meeting, but we'll be again discussing and reevaluating that as well at that meeting. And lastly, swing space and construction impact to neighbors. So all this data is what the building committees will use to evaluate the options. And how that gets formulated is this matrix behind me. And what it is a ledger that the building committee uses as a tool to record their thoughts as they discuss and debate the options. Across the top row would be all the options listed that are on the table, and on the vertical column on the left side would be the evaluation criteria that you just saw on the prior side. And what that would look like at the end as a record would be a colorized kind of red light, green light approach. So the items that have more favorability would be dark green and light green. Neutrality would be yellow, and things that are less favorable have the orange and red coloring. It really starts to bubble up to the top the options that are more favorable to the town when evaluated against all these criteria. And this will become a leave behind on the project website so that the town itself can understand how the building committee came to the recommendation as we move forward to town meeting this fall.
Great. So now we're going to take a journey through the current options that we have. Believe it or not, this is a short list. One way to look at this list of options is you can see how it's broken. The top row is a grade 2-3 configuration. The bottom row is a grade 2-3-4. We've separated the Elmwood Elementary as the 3 columns on the left, and then the 4 on the right are the Hayden Row site. Really, I guess the way to look at this also would be maybe as 7 options that happen to have a grade configuration difference between them. The footprints for the grade 2-3, by footprint I mean the shape of the building, is really the same, pretty close to the same, whether it's a grade 2-3 or 2-3-4. What we would need to do is go from a 2-story to a 3-story building for the additional grade. And then there are some spaces like cafeteria and gymnasium that would get slightly bigger. So probably the easiest way to digest this is really 7 options, 2 different grade configurations. The missing tooth that you see is that we do not have an add reno option as described earlier for the grade 2-3-4. The site could not handle that. It would be too tall of a building, really not viable. If we were to take an overview look at the addition renovation, what we're looking at here in the dashed red outline is the existing school. And what you see that's larger than the existing school in white would be new additions. In this option, we're adding on some classroom wings to the building, and we're adding on new gymnasium space. There is a little bit of demolition. You can see that the primary entrance is off of Elm Street, but there is a connection over to Wood Street. And if this were selected, our traffic engineer would take a closer look, and there are a number of options for how you would circulate on the site. But in all cases and in all options, you'll see that there's a separation of bus and car. So we're showing car in blue and bus in red. You'll typically see the car circulation being much greater on the site, and the idea is to, no matter where the location, to pull all the traffic off of the site. We have an estimated car queue of 60 that we would need to pull off of the streets and onto the site. That's for the increased enrollment, and a bus queue of at least 12. In this case, where some of the woodland areas are, we now show new parking. The gas line, you can see, runs through the site, really bisecting it. So we have play space on the kind of the southeast side of that. In the building, and the parking would be on the northwest side of that. That floor plan, I won't go into much detail, but the color coding shows red for administration and guidance, which would be located near the main entrance in all cases. Art, music, and tech are shown in light green, and they're generally in the center in the shared zone in a building. Classrooms are shown in blue, so you can see that a lot of the new construction is new classrooms. Also, the angle is not arbitrary. That's to get good natural daylight, good north-south exposure for those rooms. Purple, which you'll see are intentionally scattered around each one of the options, are dispersed special education spaces. And the idea is to interweave them, interconnect them with general academic classrooms. Anything that's yellow are kind of the large active areas, the community use spaces, so we can see here, we try to zone the school so that gym and CAF are in the same area so that can be opened for the public while the rest of the school may be closed. And then other spaces are shown as utility. If I move on to the next option, this would be all new construction on the Elmwood School site. And what you can see here again in the red outline is the existing Elmwood School. The idea would be to build the new building away from the existing building so that the existing school could function. It would come with some proximity of construction, so it would still have a level of disruption. It would certainly interrupt or change the course of vehicular circulation and access to the existing school while the new building is being built. So it does pose some challenges. But as you recall on this site, one of the things that we have to make sure that we're respecting is the gas line, which does bisect the site. So to make this building happen, we keep it between the existing school and the gas line. Once that building is built and the existing school is demolished, that would create green space or replication of fields, and then the parking would go where the green space is now. Similar to the last option, and again, in all options, I won't repeat this for every slide, but separation of bus and car. The car queue is much larger here to handle the capacity. In this case, the site plan is pretty much the same for the grade 2-3 or the grade 2-3-4. There are dotted lines that show for the smaller two-grade school, we wouldn't need quite as much parking, so there would be a little bit more, little less pavement, a little bit more green space, and the building footprint would be just a hair smaller. This is a look at that plan. We're calling it a bar plan because you can see the classroom wings are in a bent bar shape, but each one of them becomes an academic wing, an academic neighborhood, all the shared community use spaces in the center, admin and guidance up front, so that's something that you'll see repeated in all the plans. Moving on, this was a hypothetical study. If it's disruptive to build the school on the existing site, the thought of maybe having the students move off-site or into temporary space or other facilities in town, what might you build as a brand-new building over the existing building? And you could build probably a better school, a more efficient use of the site, but this is really in the realm of not viable because there is not the swing space in town. There is no desire to create a modular school. That money is not reimbursed by the MSBA. It would be quite costly. Nevertheless, it's just turning over every stone, so something that we wanted to explore. And here's a look at that plan. You can see here the three wings really come together, focusing on the heart of the school where the media center is, and we have the community use spaces off to the side. Switching over to the Hayden Row site, the site is quite large, so we really looked at two places to build a new school on the site. We're calling one of them east and one of them west. Both the east and the west parcels are south of the existing Marathon School, so the Marathon School is off the screen up in this zone here. In this case, we're showing what we're calling a pinwheel plan, so you can see multiple academic wings that pinwheel off the center of the school. It's located on the eastern portion of the site, so deeper into the parcels. As Dan had described, we would have a campus approach in all cases at Hayden Row. So you're seeing the red and blue lines coming from where the Marathon School is. So the Marathon School would be used as the joint, probably as the joint entry for both schools. And then this new development would have the joint egress back onto Hayden Row. There's plenty of car queue, more than enough here on site, and separation of bus and cars is also what you see. In all cases, too, where we're creating PE fields, physical education fields, but also recess spaces, you'll notice that the recess is close to the building. Those are only 20-minute scheduled periods, and then PE might be a little bit further away. But in all cases, we're looking at having students safely travel from the building to fields or to recess without crossing any roadways. There is the option to also close down portions of roadways during the day and use the hard surface for play. It's something that we've seen done at a number of schools. This is a look at the pinwheel plan on the western portion of the site, so closer to Hayden Row. This has the advantage of maybe consolidating some of the development. You're not going as deep into the site, disturbing less landscape and trees. You're also shortening the utilities and services that come into the site. But here we can see a plan that works with the fields, with the recess spaces, with the parking, separation of buses and cars, and again, joint use of the Marathon School for entrance into the campus and joint exit onto Hayden Row. This is a look at the plan. I should have said in a previous slide, again, if it's a grade 2-3, it's only 2-story. If it's a grade 2-3-4, you'll see 3-story. So that could be potentially a grade per floor, it could be a grade per wing. In this case, all of the academic wings come to the center where the media center is. Admin is located up front at the main entry and is flanked by the cafeteria and then the gymnasium further to the north, closer to the fields. The last set of options are, again, looking at the east and west locations. This is what we're calling a village plan. So you'll see a couple of wings that come together on what might be considered a main street within the building for the students. Here you can see very similarly, again, that circulation pattern coming from the Marathon School, separation of buses and cars. Students have safe access over to the play fields and also have the recess close to the school. Parking is located convenient to both, and this nests itself kind of in the deeper portion of the site. If that were kept to the western portion, much like the previous plan, we can see a more consolidated version of the site development, but still all of the spaces, all of the program that's needed, fitting nicely into this portion of the lot. And in all cases, the town-owned property, if this portion is developed, that does leave more land for future uses, whatever they may be. The floor plan for this option is a little bit simplified. You can see, again, it would be 2-story for grade 2-3, 3-story for 2-3-4. The academic wings feature the small learning neighborhoods. They come together with a media center at the hub in the heart. The main admin is up front, and it's flanked by the gymnasium and cafeteria. So these are very early. This is what we call feasibility study plans. Whatever grade configuration or final floor plan is selected, it'll be developed and designed into much greater detail. But this is based on the feasibility level information. So now I'll just go into high-level sustainability, some of what we've heard, some of what we've been discussing. There's a lot more to come on this, but we know that sustainability needs to be built in right from the early phases of the project. And that's why you'll see with all those planning options, there's attention being paid to good north-south orientation for the school, and for both energy and for educational purposes. So at prior community and facilities meetings, we talked about or asked what some of the priorities were for the school. And we heard that energy was really rose to the top as one of the top priorities, and that's in line with some of the goals and objectives we've heard of designing a school toward net zero or net zero ready. We also see that a close second, or in second anyway, is a design for well-being, and that's where we really think of sustainability. We don't think of it as an add-on to a design, but we really think about it as very much connected to good educational environments, good performance, good for students, teachers, as well as for energy efficiency. So that was good to see. And then we also saw discovery and integration as being part of that. So what that means is the school is a teaching tool, so that as there are elements in the landscape or the efficiencies in the building, those can become part of the learning journey for students, and it's great to make that part of the curriculum as well. And integration is really part of the philosophy and the approach to what we have for schools, not thinking of things in isolation, but really how they work together. So we also know that the state has priorities, and the state of Massachusetts is working toward a 2050 decarbonization roadmap And that matters quite a bit, not only for the planet and for some of the things that we know are important environmentally, but also as it affects projects. It means that codes are changing rapidly to keep up with the decarbonization and the energy requirements. And there are also incentives and other rebates that are also becoming available to assist communities with helping to meet this challenge. Some of your neighboring communities, we see that they're on different pathways for reduction, some of them on different timelines, but considering net zero carbon, it's all part of the equation as everybody works towards what the state's goals are and what their own town goals are, which we see Hopkinton is very much in line with. I'm just going to step through some simple slides here that talk about how we get to a carbon neutral future. And we know that today, fossil fuels and dependence on the electricity grid are what we see quite common. Moving forward, we know that PVs, and Hopkinton has already had photovoltaic panels installed on some of the projects, including the Marathon School, can help offset those costs and even create less reliance on the electricity grid. Going a step further, we know that there are systems like geothermal and other options that can really help take us a further step to be fossil fuel free, even with enhanced PVs, take care of the energy loads there, and going even further as we see the state moving in the direction toward a clean grid, that would be a future that's carbon neutral. So as we've started conversations about the project and the costs, we're of course looking at the systems overall, and we're evaluating a number of options. We're looking at the costs, both upfront, but also over the life of the system, and we're factoring in the potential for rebates. Some of these are new, some of them need to be vetted a little bit further with the MSBA to make sure they align with what the MSBA is reimbursing and will keep intact on the school. But just wanted to let the audience know that this is very much integrated into our thinking and the development of costs and the full analysis of the project.
Thanks, Bob. So as I wrap up here, and we talk about the schedule ahead, we know we throw a lot at you tonight, and we're going to open up to questions in just a moment. So the schedule ahead is that, as I noted, we're in the PDP phase was behind us. We're in the middle of PSR, and so that's really the important decision where you make the decision about the size of the building, number of grades, and the location. And really that's the stage where we're at now. The final cost, the details of the project, that happens in the August submission. But where we are now, the building committee is looking to evaluate these options that they presented to you tonight to make a decision about the size of the building, the location, and the overall grade configuration that the school committee is going to make. So the meetings that are in front of us in the near term are the building committee will meet again on January 31st to go through these discussions and deliberations. The school committee is scheduled to meet on February 2nd to make the recommendation on the grade configuration, whether it's a 2-4 or a 2-3. Coming out of that meeting, the school building committee will meet again on February 7th, where they'll then narrow the options to whichever grade configuration the school committee has recommended, move forward, and continue the debate and comparison of the options. They'll get back together, scheduled for February 13th, where they're looking to make the recommendation, and that is the recommendation for the size, location, and grade configuration of the school that ultimately becomes the project. From there, we'll review that decision and recommendation back with the school committee on February 16th, looking for a support vote, and then again with the select board on February 28th, and get back together with the school building committee on March 1st for their overall submission and approval of the package to the MSBA. And that'll conclude the second step of the process when we then go into the detailed portion of the project of schematic design. So that kind of concludes our presentation tonight. The website is also what I want to allude you to. So up on the website today, we've put the past submissions, all these past presentations, whether it's at the school committee, school building committee, forums, they're all up there. Take your time to look at them. The slides tonight will be up there as well in the near term. Elmwoodproject.com, a nice easy address. When you're on the website, you can also find an email address that goes to several of us on the team and the building committee so that we can get questions coming in and then back to you with answers to those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn to John if there's any closing remarks.
No closing remarks from me, but we are going to move into the question and answer portion. For those watching on HCAM, if you want to submit a question, you can email it, hoping that it's up on the screen, but it's ESBC2, the number 2, at hopkintonma.gov. Both Jeff and I have the inbox open, so we can pick up any questions that you're sending, but I'll also open it up to the audience. If you have a question, please feel free to come up to one of the microphones, and we will do our best to answer it for you.
Thank you for all the hard work so far. I'm Mary Arnott. I live at 51 Teresa Road off Hayden Row. Before I came into this meeting, I was thinking, oh, please put it at the Elmwood site, please put it. And now I'm not so sure that's the best solution. It seems like it could be very disruptive while school is going on in the existing Elmwood. And there does seem to be some other benefits to put it at the Hayden Row location. So I know it's not decided yet, and I'm still keeping an open mind as well. I was curious, though, is there any way that we could possibly look at the new school building to be even larger? Because we always seem to run into, you guys do the greatest job in trying to project how much school we might need, and then 2 years down the road or so, we're out of space. Hopkinton is very popular. I think it will continue to be very popular. It's going to grow. So I'm thinking if we're going to go ahead and put in a new school, let's make it as large as we possibly can between state funding and Hopkinton funding, and plan even further for the future. And maybe even look at a configuration of, and I'll go to the school board if they want some input, 2, 3, 4, 5, or something else to accommodate even more classes and more students in the new school, and maybe then a couple years after the new school is built, we won't have to put so much money into adding on to the existing schools. So I'm usually trying to get you not to spend money, but tonight I think I'm encouraging you to spend as much as we can possibly up front and accommodate our future needs, because you know they're going to be there. The other thing is that I wasn't quite sure on the locations. I was trying to envision, I know there are existing homes on Chamberlain and the new homes going in, and then there's Sanctuary Lane that's right there where it seems to already back up to Marathon School. So I couldn't envision the location. I apologize for either the east or west on Hayden Row. If you could give me a little input on that. When we say east and west, are we talking east and west side of Hayden Row? No.
No, so what we're talking about is within the site. So essentially when we talk about Hayden Row, and if we could head back to these, if you think about the entire plot of land from essentially where Marathon is right now, all the way to start line, and behind that as well. So if we pull up,
This is what used to be Water Fresh.
yeah, so that's Start Line Brewery right there. So you can see the school kind of tucks in, the new school would kind of tuck into the land behind that.
Okay, so it's on the opposite side of Hayden Row from Marathon,
No, it's on the same side as Marathon.
because Start Line is not on the same side as, oh, Marathon, I'm sorry. I'm thinking Hopkins,
Yep.
excuse me. Yes, Marathon, okay, all right.
So
So it'd all be on,
It's all on the same side, so
It's
east
all
and
the
west
same
are
side.
contiguous. Think of it like a V, an X cross, right? So it's an X with two kind of Vs off that. So this is Marathon's existing parking lot up top. So what we are calling the west is closer to Marathon along those first couple of houses after the driveway.
Okay.
And that's 147 Marathon that was sold, or Hayden Row that was sold as part of that property. So that's the west, which is closer to Hayden Row. And the east, as we talked about, is deeper into the site and directly behind the Start Line Brewery in that facility.
okay. And either east or west would give us space to grow, I think you said, right?
That's correct. So to answer part of your previous question, so the MSBA worked with the town to decide the enrollment, and so they've offered 2 enrollments, a 2-3 or a 2-3-4. So as part of the MSBA process, we can't bring in an additional grade. but they will work with us on the size of individual locations. Like we're advocating for a larger gymnasium and cafeteria for the population, and they've acquiesced to that. So there are abilities to grow those communal spaces as well as the classrooms themselves. Growth happens in a few different ways. If it's a small growth, which is not what's been going on in Hopkinton, the number of students per capacity is what bumps up a little bit. So if you figure that 22 students is the average grade, and we have 18 classrooms per grade, if you had one extra student per classroom, that would accommodate a whole extra classroom worth of students by making the change of one student grade change. As part of all the options, what's dashed over here in the back end of these wings is a future footprint, which is the case of what's going on at the Marathon School today, where they're building onto the end of the wing. So the MSBA encourages to make sure we've identified locations, kept them free from utilities and things like that that would otherwise encumber an expansion of the project down the road. So there's internal capacity by bumping up individual classrooms, and then there's external capacity with footprints for future additions should they be needed.
Well, I'm kind of sorry to hear we can't build it bigger for more grades if we wanted to, but I did have another question, if it'll come back to me. I know it's probably out of the scope, but do we foresee any use for the existing Elmwood if we build the brand-new one by Marathon?
So, you know, I think we don't know the answer to that question yet. I think that there are a lot of potential future uses that have been discussed for that site and for that, potentially that building, but that is not something that's been.
Yeah,
you know,
I know
concluded
it's
yet.
kind of out of scope, because we haven't even decided on center school yet, right? So we
Yeah.
end up with all these empty buildings, or maybe they'll come down eventually. Okay, I was hoping, like I said, we can build bigger so that even if we don't use it right away, we could make use of the space with community activities or something until the, school population grows. But I don't, as much as I hate my taxes going up, believe me, they're a real pain in my neck. I'd go for bigger and plan it and do as much as we can now, rather than a year after it's built, find we need to build an addition or something, and then.
So I will also offer that while obviously none of us can see into the future exactly, so I was part of the Marathon project as well. And when it comes to building for capacity, this has been a different process, where Marathon, so the MSBA uses these methodologies to predict enrollment growth, and they use them for every single district, so they have to be consistent. And when we built the Marathon School, we had a lot of back and forth with them because we saw a lot of this expansion coming, because all of us who live in town saw the expansion coming, but it didn't really fit into the formulas as well as we would have liked it to. What we found through this process is, I think the last experience in Hopkinton might have sort of helped them refresh the formulas a little bit. So the enrollment projections that they're giving us to build this building allow for a lot more growth than previous projects have. So again, can't tell the future, but hopefully it makes you feel a little bit better that we're pretty optimistic that these projections really do accommodate the kind of growth we've been seeing and the type of growth we expect to see, so that we won't be in a situation where we need to expand these buildings in as much of the short term as we have previously.
Oh, thank you. My only other comment would be on traffic. I unfortunately think traffic is always underestimated because I live off Hayden Row, and I have to really plan my day around the drop-off times in the morning and the pickup times in the afternoons, because there are times when I've tried to go up Hayden Row, and I'm stuck 20 minutes at least to try to get through there. And then when you got people trying to pick students up, the parents are lined out on the street, and the cars are all over the place. It's a small price to pay for a good school system and doing well by our students, but I think our traffic is always underestimated. I think it will bring a lot more traffic. And I feel for people who are trying to go north and west, north and south on 85, to get back and forth to work and stuff. The mornings and the afternoons are almost impassable, but.
Yeah, and as you can see, we're doing our best in the designs to mitigate it as much as
Yeah.
possible, pull as many cars and buses off the road at those queue times as we can. But yeah, there's obviously a limit to what we can do. So, but we're trying.
Okay. Well, I encourage you to still look at both sites. You know, like you said, that evaluation has to be done. And if it ends up being down by Marathon and there's more traffic, I'll just plan more time to make my trips through town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, David Simpson, 16 Ledgestone. So one quick follow-up question. For the Elmwood site, are there expansion areas available? Because I didn't see any dashed lines on the Elmwood sites. So I see there's additional parking, but that's,
So there are, they're not showing up in the site plan, but all of the buildings were planned to have 10% expansion onto them.
okay. And leading off of that, so I also saw the ESBC meeting about sustainability last week or 2 weeks ago. And first of all, I'd just like to say it was a great presentation, very informative. Question about, again, about the Elmwood. So one of the options is geothermal for the school. Does this site have sufficient space for the well field of the size that you're talking?
So Elmwood certainly has a smaller footprint and would have more restriction. We also have to work with the gas company to see what types of restrictions they have there. So that's a conversation that hasn't occurred in terms of the proximity of which we can get to the gas line itself. So there are more restrictions on the Elmwood site than there are on the Hayden Row site. So
Okay, so some of the options might not be viable with the Elmwood site.
There's ability to get geothermal in both options. The question is how many wells, we can get. So some of the options that we discussed at the building committee a few weeks ago for everybody in the audience was an all geothermal approach or a hybrid approach. So a hybrid approach would still work at both. An all geothermal still needs more consideration if it's at the Elmwood site.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Tina Burrell at 7 Daniel. I live in the same complex as your first speaker, Mary. First of all, just jokingly, but some language therapist, busing, if you're talking about vehicles, has one S, two S's is kissing. But I feel, I've lived in town in this particular house for 30 years. I feel bashed, whacked, and thwacked. Everything goes down Hayden Row, and I understand why. But Mary said it, you have to plan your whole day around this Monday through Friday when the buses are coming through, because you're waiting, you've got all that stuff coming up out of Milford and wherever they're coming from. I respect empirical investigation, I respect numbers and statistics and all that, that's critical. But there's also that human factor. I mean, like I said, bashed, whacked, and thwacked. Everything goes down there because there's a piece of grass there. It's enough. That's it. Just wanted to say that. That's how much I'm upset.
Hi, I'm Bill Collins. I live on Teresa Road also, and that combination of traffic and, before I go there, the entrance to Marathon School, would that be the same entrance for this proposed school? So there'd be two entrances on Hayden Row. Okay.
So, and the idea of two entrances is actually primarily to relieve queuing onto Hayden Row.
Okay.
So by opening up the second entrance, it gives a lot more flexibility to the site in terms of not having that sort of, that backup to, onto Hayden Row. So that's the primary reason why we would want to look at that if we did look at that.
That's really not the place for another school. It really isn't. That young lady was talking about the fact that it's horrible traffic. Do you have any idea about the increase in traffic that this school on Hayden Row will bring? I know there was a study done, and that was study done based on current use, current of the buses and the cars and stuff. This is going to add another 350 probably visits a day, plus buses on Hayden Row. It cannot take that. I mean, the traffic, she mentioned the traffic, it's horrible, absolutely horrible. You can't even go down Pleasant Street now, down to the main street. And it's because of buses, there's like 10, 15 buses in a row, plus the cars. It's just not a viable alternative. Elmwood would make more sense than putting another school on Hayden Row. It's incomprehensible, it really is. I don't know if anybody here lives along 85. Probably not, but it's horrible. Every day, as the lady was saying, we have to plan. You cannot go anyplace between 7:30. If you have a doctor's appointment, you have a real problem getting out. And coming back, it's horrible. So, you know, Elmwood is the way to go. Start with a new school. Don't burden the people off the Hayden Row Street. It's just not fair. It just really isn't. Thank you.
Richard D. Simone, 22 Apple Tree Hill. I take exception to the thought that you cannot build an existing, a school on the existing site without major problems. There's also another way of looking at this. It might inspire a little girl or a little boy to become an engineer or an architect or a contractor, and you're looking at one. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments in the audience?
Where's the next meeting? Is it going to be here?
So the next meeting, so yeah, I'll do a quick review of the schedule if we're wrapping up on questions. So the next elementary school building committee meeting is on January 31st. It will be at HCAM. So in the HCAM studios where we broadcast from. I do want to say just before we do a wrap up, in one kind of response to one of the comments that was made, when we do assess traffic, we certainly aren't just looking at existing conditions. We are definitely looking at what the numbers would be in terms of transferring from, from site to site, which includes even at the existing Elmwood site, if we were bringing over the fourth grade to that site, that is definitely information that we will consider. So please don't think we're just looking at current existing conditions and using that as our meter. I myself do live right off of Hayden Row as well, so I'm well versed in the traffic trying to get through there in the morning and the evening time. But as you can see, when it comes to the sites in town, we're dealing with, I think it's fair to say we don't have an option that is without its challenges, but we also don't have an option that's without its benefits. So that's why the committee is really trying to go through a rigorous process to arrive at what we think is the best option for not just the school itself, but for the town overall. But we deeply appreciate the feedback and the comments and questions that we get, and please keep it coming because it does help inform our decisions. So just to quickly recap, the next meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee will be on January 31st, 1 week from tonight at 6 o'clock. It will be at the HCAM studios. It will also be broadcast live on HCAM. But certainly, if you want to provide any public comment or question, please do come to join us in person. And then the next building committee following that will be on February 7th, where we'll continue debating the different criteria for site selection of the school, targeting a final deliberation and vote on February 13th. I don't have any questions in the inbox, so if there are no additional questions or comments from the audience, I think we can wrap up. Again, thank you to everyone who came and joined us in person tonight. Thank you to everyone who watched at HCAM, and we will see you on the 31st. Have a good night.